The supreme leader of the Orthobros is a Russian Orthodox walking clown emoji named Dyer.
Iconoclasm is the heresy that ultimately is a Christological heresy. So this is a dispute over the influence of Islamic thought at the time of the Seventh Ecumenical Council and before, which led to the destruction of the sacramental principle of material objects taking on symbolic meaning and conveying truths. So icons, for example, they teach us. They're written to teach us truths about Christ. As St. Maximus says, even the natural world, you could read it like it's a garment that Christ wears to teach us about Christ. It's like a book. St. Maximus uses that analogy in the Ambigua. So in the same way, we have to be consistent with our incarnational principle and how the incarnation affects the material world, and then how that spills over into our not just our liturgy, but also our view of matter, right? Matter is not evil. Matter is not something that we have to fight against in some Gnostic sense. Matter is sanctified by virtue of the incarnation. Well, it's sanctified, first of all, because God created it, but God created it with the foresight of the incarnation. So matter has been taken up into God in a deified sense through the incarnation and ultimately in the transfiguration. And hence, as Paul says in Romans 8, all the created world will experience in different modes the participation in God through the transfiguration. So I'm going to say that iconoclasm is relevant today because most of the Protestant world, and even the Roman Catholic world, which you might not expect, is infected now with iconoclasm. So the Reformers, of course, without realizing that they had adopted a lot of Nestorian mistakes and Nestorian errors when they just split from the Western Church, the Latin Church, over their theological issues, they utilized soteriology as the basis, typically speaking, for why they split, right? Justification by faith alone, which is justified on the basis of the Bible alone, et cetera, et cetera. But in doing so, this forced them to make their Ordo Theologiae, their order of theology, begin with soteriology. And then so Christology and the Trinitarian theology become an afterthought. When that's an afterthought, you usually get some kind of Christological heresy like Arianism or Nestorianism, which we'll mention here in a moment. But in the case of the Protestant world, you have this underlying just sort of assumption most of the time that it's always wrong to have an image of Christ. Well, this is actually Gnostic because Christ, according to the New Testament, according to Paul, is the icon of the Father, right? The hypostasis of Christ is the direct icon of the divine hypostasis of the Father. And so by extension, the world, because of the Logos Logi doctrine, is also in a way a kind of icon of Christ in varying in different senses, right? And so we become little icons of Christ as well. So therefore, in the process of Christology over many centuries, iconography became a crucial debate. And the ancient church laid down many specific canons and principles for how the liturgy and the praxis of the church utilizes these icons. That's why for us, for example, the Roman Catholic Church began its iconoclastic departure not at the time of Vatican II with the adopting of a lot of Protestant principles of the liturgy, but rather back at the time of the Carolinian influence. So back at before the schism in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, you already had the beginning of a departure from the normative canons of the Seventh Ecumenical Council on how to do liturgical art and so forth, right? So eventually the Latin Church goes in its own direction and you have the explosion of statuary and all these strange departures, such as forbidding children to partake of communion, the denial of paedo communion, right? All these innovations begin earlier even than 1054. So it's important to keep that in mind, that iconoclasm is not just a Protestant thing. It's not just this Muslim idea, again, that's ultimately fighting the incarnation. It's also now in the Roman Catholic world, precisely because specifically at Vatican II, you have the overwhelming influence of Anglican and Lutheran liturgical reformers that helps to draw up the new Mass. Okay, so that's worth mentioning, I think, as a major error. And in the history of Islam, the origins of Islam also in some sense come out of early Arian, Nestorian, and Jewish ideology that influences the beginning stages of Islam. So hence their iconoclasm ideas. So that's present today. Next, I want to talk about Arianism. Arianism is, of course, the ancient mistake. Actually, no, not Arianism. Monoenergism. Monoenergism is one that you might not be aware of because this is the days of St. Maximus and the Sixth Council. And this is the idea that the human will has to be replaced, overridden, or irresistibly moved, and energetically, that there's only one energy present in the willing, and that namely is the divine will. There's no other way for men to be saved because man's will, naturally speaking, is in perpetual rebellion and movement away from God. So this is, of course, Calvinistic. It's also underlying a lot of Protestant theology, whether they know it or not. They don't have these sort of more nuanced distinctions that we have in our theology. But regardless, that idea is there that God has to ultimately just kind of move your will so that you have a new heart, so that you're regenerated, so that you are effectually called. Now, we wouldn't have a problem with the divine energy and power becoming part of our being. It does. That's what theosis is. But what they don't understand is that there's a created energy and will that's proper to human nature, and there's the uncreated energy and will that's proper to the divine, and that there's a synergy. There's never a replacement of this. If there was a replacement of this, then we would be monothelites. We would be monoenergists, and we would affirm the Monophysite doctrine. We would have to, because we would affirm the idea that the divine power in the incarnation replaced and overpowered the human energy and will in Christ. But we don't teach that. We teach that Christ had a human will and energy that was naturally operant, and it was never replaced or destroyed or ceased, right? That's why you can't have the notion of grace replacing will. So in that sense, the monoenergist position is another aspect of the Calvinist Protestant view, which even if you're not a Calvinist as a Protestant, or even if you're a Lutheran, or if you're just some sort of evangelical who, I just had to pray and like God did it all, bro. Like that's still the same idea, you see. And it's really unclear in these sort of simplistic views as to, well, do you have to pray the sinner's prayer? Is that a work that you do? Is the work that you do the mental noetic action of having faith in Christ? Or is it actually having an intellectual understanding of the doctrine of sola fide itself that saves you? You'll never get a coherent answer from Protestants. You will get as many answers as there are Protestants. So none of these doctrines are at all applicable to us because we see them as variations on many of these ancient heresies, including